I wanted to come to you to talk about something that I think is important in our lives, and especially in our spiritual lives. That is the importance of doing spiritual or intellectual work. You see, we live in a culture that gets very used to doing physical work with our hands. We think of farmers or construction people. Lots of people do fix-it jobs at home, or they build things, or they work with wood, and we're used to that. Many younger people today spend a lot of time exercising and training and honing their body to stay in shape, to have good health. The benefits of it are many. And it's like we recognize the goodness of all of those things. We know the goodness of eating healthy, and we work hard at maintaining a good standard of health. Lots of the things that craftsmen can make and other works of art are beautiful and stunning. They take often quite a lot of dedication and time. It's one of the things I've come to appreciate as you look at home-crafted goods at various shows like the North Dakota Show and different things like that. When people make it by hand, it's hard work. And then along comes something like this. It's the book that we're using for my Bible study, and lots of others. When we get to something in the spiritual life, all of a sudden our sense of work often disappears. At least what would happen to me in the seminary, and may happen to you sometimes as well, is you'd be reading along and all of a sudden you'd realize that you're not understanding something very well, that it's kind of a hard topic or a hard subject, and it was so easy to throw up your hands in frustration and put the book down and stop reading. The truth is, that's an awful idea. It's important just to say that. The reality is that we're not used to intellectual work, of having to use our minds, having to think about a problem and work at solving it where the solution isn't apparent at the very beginning. One of the most amazing studies that I encountered talked about how children born to parents are sometimes thought of as gifted at something like piano or a musical instrument or art or various other things. And these researchers did a study, and what they found is that parents that thought their kids were gifted, by the time the children were, I think it was 8 or 9 years old, had already spent on average over 10,000 hours honing the talent. Now, some of them may have been gifted, but the point of this research study was to talk about that a huge amount of it is trained. It's actually the same thing with our minds. We can train our minds to think better, to work through problems. It's not easy. It's not something that just makes you happy. In fact, it's often frustrating. But it's foundational and it's important. The truth is, we have lots of things in our world and lots of books that are written. There's lots of great information out there, but we have to learn to sift it and put it together, especially when it's not readily apparent. Intellectual work takes practice. It's something that we can grow in. But if every time we encounter difficulty, we put the book down or we never re-engage with it, we get stuck. We stop learning. And the importance of this for the Christian life is hard to understate. The reality is, when we read the Bible, when we encounter the scriptures, when you read the writings of the saints, like the Confessions of Augustine, or you look at Introduction to the Devout Life, or let's say you're brave and you pick up the Summa Theologica, and all of a sudden you find yourself in over your head, and something just doesn't make sense at all. Those are the times where this habit of intellectual work is so important. Sometimes in our prayer, we pray for something and we have to work hard. We feel like God has a message for us and it's not readily apparent. And we so easily, or at least I so easily, behave like a little child, and it's like, well, fine then, I'm just going to go do my own thing, or I'm not going to spend this time, or I'm not going to waste this time. And that can all happen. But the reality is, part of growing as a Christian, part of growing in our spiritual lives, is working at this habit of intellectual and spiritual work, is beginning to engage in things that are difficult for us. We can grow into learning how to do it, our talents and abilities can grow. Sometimes I hear people say, well, that's just the way I am, or I just don't get it. And it might be true. That might be where you're at now. But there's no rule that says you have to stay there. The Christian life is a journey. God has taught us so much. And His teaching spans things like the Bible. It spans books like the one that we're using for Bible study. It spans the writings of the saints and so many other things. The reality is, there's a God waiting to be discovered. There's a life of the mind that can actually feed us, that isn't just dry and boring and like old college classes. That's actually nourishing, because the more we know God, the more we know about Him, the more we're able to love Him. Knowledge increases our capacity to love. So when you find yourself in the midst of some of these struggles, when you find yourself really having a hard time understanding something, it's okay to put it down, but come back to it. Work on building the habit of nourishing your mind and nourishing your soul with intellectual things and with prayer. It might be hard work with sweat and tears and difficulty and pain, but on the other side is a similar result to that of exercising well, is a healthy mind and a soul that's ready to put in the diligence, to put in the effort that we need to follow God more faithfully.